Welcome to the Designated Drinker Show. I am Louise Solis, your host on the podcast that's raising the bar on craft cocktails. And with me, it's my friend, the olive in my martini, the mixtress DC, Gina.
That's a good one. Yeah, I haven't been a garnish in the cocktail yet.
Yeah, I can keep you guessing.
I know. I'm like, that was surprising. That was a good one.
So, more surprises. Today's designated drinker is going to take us on a journey into the past. It's going to be intoxicating, it's going to be sobering, and I'm sure it's going to be enlightening as well. So let's just get this damn show on the road.
I'm in today. Let's do it.
All right, let's welcome Dr. Kristen Burton, the author of The Drunkard's Progress, How Alcohol Became an Intoxicant in the Era of Enlightened Medicine. Whew, what a mouthful. I got it right, I hope. Did I?
You got, I mean, it's a tentative title anyway. But yeah, academics are not known for being short when it comes to our titles. Like, they just get a little longer every time. So maybe we'll get a little more brief in the future.
I know a few bartenders who have recipes that are about that long too. Right. Talk about long-winded.
Right.
Or names of drinks.
So first, is it all right that we call you Kristen?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. When you earn the title, you deserve it. Absolutely.
Yeah, Doc, I don't know.
Doc.
Doc's fine, but no, Kristen's good.
I've always assumed I've been called worse, so it's fine.
I mean, when you're in the classroom, who knows what students say, so.
Oh, we were all them at one point.
I know, that's why I worry, but that's okay.
So let's talk about what you're here for. Let's talk about your book.
Okay.
Where did it all start? What was your inspiration?
All right, so my book is essentially my dissertation, what my dissertation was revised. And when I approached my dissertation, I was mostly interested in kind of early drinking practices in early colonial America, how they came to be. For my master's degree, I focused a lot on beer brewing in early modern London, how it became this big industry. And I started with, well, how does beer transfer over to the colonies and what happens there? And then when I got into it, I realized they aren't drinking beer, they're drinking a lot of rum. And how did that come into being? So that's really where it started. I was kind of looking at this, well, maybe it's a shift in drinking culture that happens. And it just grew into this massive question about why are people drinking the things that they are, and how much are they drinking, and is that acceptable? And these larger discourse over what people drink, who should be drinking it, and how much should people be drinking really became central questions of that era. And I began to realize this is the early origins of what becomes the temperance movement. So most of the historical literature out there on prohibition and on temperance really start in the 19th century. And I realized these debates start in the 17th century.
Wow.
So you have to go much further back and look at, first of all, how people are drinking, how that changes. And a lot of that stems around the fact that distilled spirits became mass-produced commodities around the mid-17th century. And it's something that hadn't existed on that scale before. Access to much more potent liquors became available for the first time to all social levels and all genders, which was a problem.
Yeah.
When women started drinking spirits, it was like, maybe we shouldn't allow this. But people started to ask those kind of questions, right? Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there, Doc. Thank God, okay?
Right? And we can get into all that because there's a huge episode that happens in early 18th century London, the gin craze, and it was highly feminized. And this is something that historians have looked at.
Spoonful of sugar.
Yeah, right?
Spoonful of sugar.
Helps that medicine go down.
I mean, Mary Poppins didn't come from nowhere. That's the truth.
You're just saying Mary Poppins was drunk the entire time?
Well, she had a magical bag. I'm just saying.
What else would you put in there?
If you historically went to that time period when that was allegedly happening, right? Mm-hmm. And you went back, and then you would have in London, mm-hmm. and we can agree on this. There would have been like these little dispensaries everywhere, and for a pence, you could drop a penny a pence in a machine, and a lot of them look like cats because
the old-time gin. Yeah.
And you put it in, and you hit the little thing, and all of a sudden, boom, you got a shot of gin.
Yep.
And at that time, it was made with more sugar, and it wasn't until, I forget what year it was. I want to say it was like the like 1890 so-ish when they started making London Dry, when they deleted the sugar depletion. And the reason why, honestly, was dental. Because people's teeth were falling out.
Yes.
I'm serious.
How much sugar people were consuming at that time was absurd. And that also stems to the colonization of the Caribbean, which also ties into the production of rum, which was happening at the same time. So in addition to gin being this huge thing in the late 17th, early 18th centuries, rum is also being produced on this huge scale because it's a byproduct of making sugar.
Yeah.
Sugar is like the commodity of that time. But if there's anything they can make to capitalize and make more money, hey, there's all this molasses.
Waste not, want not.
Exactly. And then you have rum. So
And sailors.
yes. So it's all tied in together, and it produces this huge discourse over just how much should people be drinking. At first, people didn't distinguish between liquors and, say, beer. The way we do today. And it was a part of that discourse that that distinction came about. And that's really what I became interested in. And I moved away from this, like, okay, I'm not so much interested in the drinking culture, but more so of how did these ideas about what is acceptable with drinking came into being. And ultimately, it became what I'd like to call a pre-temperance movement history. Why did a temperance movement happen in the 19th century? There's a history leading to that. When you have to look backward.
Washington, D.C. That's what happened. Too many women in a Baptist church in D.C. hanging out. Finally are like,
How they keep their men home.
well, well, it was more than that, you know. It was a wild time.
Yes.
It was a wild time, and people there was whiskey places and rum houses, and people were drinking, and yeah, I mean, I understood, but how they passed it was the craziest. They put it on a land act, so so people didn't even know what they voted for.
Oh.
And
They were very sneaky. And also,
What? Politics are sneaky? That doesn't happen today.
well,
they're very transparent.
I mean, in DC, right? There's DC and Portland. I can't remember. There's one other place. There's still temperance fountains, right?
Yep.
So there was a dentist. I keep telling you, it has something to do with teeth. There was a dentist who gave all of his money. What was his name? Cosgrove. What was his last name?
Ooh, you're getting in the 19th century. It was a little. That's where I stopped.
So he was a dentist anyway. He gave all this money to the women to put fresh water because they were convinced that people were drinking alcohol because there was no available water. So he was like one of the first people to go below the water table and get like really fresh water for people to drink. And they had these fountains in Washington D.C. is one it's actually fully intact on 7th Street.
Okay.
And we actually go every year for Repeal Day and, pop a bottle of champagne illegally in the street and go, whatever.
Nice.
I do believe it is Dr. Cosgrove. I'm almost, I don't know, I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
I love this.
I can get into the nitty gritty of the 18th century. The 19th century, the temperance history, the amount of stuff that's out there that's been written about it is almost overwhelming. And so kind of an up and coming grad student in alcohol studies is like, where can I find my own little niche? And I realized not very many people have written about that earlier era. There's a few books out there that have jumped into the 18th century or even earlier, the 17th century in meaningful ways, but the medieval era gets a lot of attention, and the 19th century and the modern era get the bulk of attention. There's this just kind of lapse, this gap.
Like a void. Huh?
Yeah, a little bit. You'll get books that focus on the 19th century. They'll have like a chapter on the 18th century, and it's very sweeping overview of this, what I would say is one of the most pivotal eras in changing the way people think about alcohol. You don't just wake up in the first day, January 1st of, 1800 and say, well, alcohol is probably a problem. I think it's making people sick and maybe we should regulate it. There's think about people's relationship with alcohol for millennia. Since the beginning of civilization, humans have been producing, consuming, living with alcohol and never questioning it until that era. And I was fascinated by that question. Why? Yeah. How did that come into being? So that's really what the heart of the book is, this idea of defining intoxication and grouping alcohol in with other drugs and intoxicants.
That's really cool. So how, with your research, with things like you say, there's this void, like what have you found and what have you used to like come up with where your theories? Where are you? If there's a void, how are you find? Like it's like trying to find that needle in a haystack.
A little bit, but there's also a lot of stuff out there that people simply haven't looked at the way that I've been looking at it. So some of the main sources that I use include a lot of cookbooks, cookery books that women kept in their homes because women were the primary producers of alcohol for centuries. Beer brewing, there's a feminized term for brewer that is, I mean, it's only for women. It's brewster. There's no masculine specific term for beer brewer. That's just for men because women were so strongly associated with the production of ale and beer for so long that they have their own term. They're brewsters.
And bread.
And what?
And bread. And they would make their bread and they would, and it was a byproduct.
Yes, cooking, baking, and brewing. It was considered women's work for a really long time. It's something you did in the household. That's, men worked outside of the house. And that's what my master's thesis focused on, in addition to kind of the masculinization of the trade, how the introduction of hops, and we don't need to get into all that, but how the introduction of hops into beer brewing did lead to this kind of masculinization of the trade. And there's other historians who have looked at women getting pushed out of that. But for centuries, alcohol was women's game.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at ancient Sumerians have Ninkasi, the goddess of beer brewing.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the hymn to Ninkasi is essentially a recipe for brewing beer. So this is something that has existed for a really long time. This idea that women are not supposed to drink is very modern, and a lot of it does come out of this discourse from the 18th century. But I look at these cookery books, recipes written by women, also medicinal texts is where I started because distilled spirits were considered the waters of life, aqua vita, right? They were medicinal. Physicians called them new jewels of health. There's this guy, George Baker, it's from the 1570s, this text. He wrote that distilled spirits could make the lame walk again. The
opposite effect, actually. May not work.
Flip that.
Quite as well.
When you feel no pain, you can pretty much do anything.
There was no illness that distilled spirits could not cure. And that was 1570s. Fast forward a century by the 1670s, and we're starting to see more public proclamations, primarily from ministers. Those moral authorities are some of the first people to come out and say, this is actually becoming a problem. Look at the way people are conducting themselves. You're not behaving in a way that's spiritual. You're not being a good child of God, right? You are engaging in gluttony.
Yeah.
You're drinking in excess, and this is a problem. So looking at cookery books and these medicinal texts, I kind of established the basis of this is how people lived with alcohol, distilled spirits specifically. This is how they perceived them. They were medicinal. They were also a way for the wealthy to show off how wealthy they were because that's how exclusive distilled spirits were at that time. Yeah. And then fast forwarding into the 17th century when they become a commodity of the Atlantic world and colonization, then it does become accessible, it becomes cheaper, and more people are drinking. And then we start to see the effects of drunkenness on a much larger scale. Yeah. Because people don't distinguish, like I said, between drinking a pint of beer and, say, drinking a pint of rum, right?
Yeah. It was somewhere in that exact, I don't know what year it was right then when they went from they used to make things in copper stills and everything was very small.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, the modern age started happening and they came up with a column still, which means they could produce gin and vodka or a neutral spirit and flavor it very quickly within hours.
Mm-hmm. So that mass production came into play.
It was an opportunity to make money and then bring something that was never for common people quickly to get it. And it's just, it's like everything else. It's like, I would love to go to Saks every day, but I go to Target, and Target's for the masses, so there you go.
And that just shows how high the demand was, that they're developing this kind of technology to produce it at that scale because they know they can sell it.
Yeah, of course.
And that's
supply and demand.
Exactly. And that's what happens throughout this whole era, is this huge process of transformation in the way people produce, consume, and think about alcohol. And so I look at those cookery books, I look at those medicinal texts, the ministers and their sermons against excessive drinking.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that was key as to what was going on.
Yes.
I mean, it's like you work backwards from that, but they were speaking to it because it was of concern for them.
Right, right. And as it was becoming more and more of a problem, they're some of the earliest voices to denounce it. And then you start seeing more public officials starting to say, wait, this is starting to affect our bottom line. You have drunk laborers, you have inefficient labor production.
Yeah.
And then it spurns it to this larger issue of, okay, well, who should be drinking? Should laborers have access to these spirits? Should women? Should slaves?
Yeah.
You know, it becomes this huge discourse over accessibility. And also the class divide becomes really key because, like I said, spirits were a thing that limited, when it was of limited supply, only certain people in the population had access to it. Well, now everyone has access to it, so it's not special anymore. And there are people who say, these poor laborers are literally drinking above their station. They're not content with beer anymore. They must have spirits. And that was a problem. So there's a lot of layers to unpack. And I realized that as I was jumping into it, I was like, this is becoming a huge topic. And there's this massive debate going on throughout this whole era, primarily in the 18th century. It gets caught up in Enlightenment philosophy, this new emphasis on reason and rationality when you uphold the rational mind as the key to civilization and society. Well, drunkenness doesn't fit into that, right? You can't be drunk and then be a rational thinker. So you have...
Well, I don't know. I might beg to differ.
We figured out that moderate line, right? Centuries of practice, we finally got to moderation. But yeah, it's this whole discourse over what is acceptable in these new kind of emerging early modern and then eventually modern societies. And the last people to get in on the game in my book are the physicians. So I kind of start with the physicians with these medical texts, and I end with the physicians as they are now being influenced by Enlightenment philosophy. They're seeing this emerging public issue of people who are drunk in the streets, and that wasn't necessarily something they saw on that scale before, especially after the gin craze. And then the physicians are saying, this is a medical issue. This is affecting the body in addition to the mind. And they step in as the authority on this issue, and they medicalize it in a way that's beneficial for them professionally.
Sure.
Because physicians for a long time weren't very popular. They got a bad reputation for a long time. They kept fleeing the cities when the plague would break out. Not a good way to get people to trust you. But this was a way for them to establish their profession in a way that it hadn't been established before. So this was something they made themselves the authority on. They start defining new ideas of physical addiction and drinking. And it's by the mid-19th century you see the term alcoholism begin to emerge. So, yeah.
Oh, I guess I didn't realize. You don't think about it as to when.
So at the same time, I'm serious. It's the same time the cocktail, the word cocktail actually comes into play.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was coined. I mean, they're still looking for the original text and who coined it because they cannot find it. It doesn't exist. I mean,
we'll ask anyone in New Orleans and we have our story.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying like bartenders, keeping good records. Never. So they're trying to figure out when that happened, but alcoholism, she's right. I mean, 100%. It was very around the same exact time. It was like that close of the century where everything started having terms. Yeah. And that's when it got very interesting. And you're in the birthplace of cocktails here, and we're in New Orleans, right? We tell everybody that we're here?
Oh, yes. Well, just in case we haven't, yes, we are in the heart of New Orleans here at the Napoleon House, and you're probably hearing a lot of odd background noises, but it's because it's an old building, and they're doing some major renovations. So come September, according to Chef, it should be all done. And it should be beautiful, so you should come and visit. It's beautiful as it is. They're open for business, so just excuse the noise, please.
But what I think is amazing where you are in your location, you could just walk into a history lesson right here of where it came from, mother cocktails, Sazeracs.
And if you drink along the way, you'll literally stumble upon them.
Yeah, yes, but
I'm full of it.
But you have places also where temperance was held, like the Roosevelt Hotel. It's right here. I mean, you had so much history happen in one building, between Civil War, everything that happened, tempers move. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Peychaud's apothecary shop is just up the street.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Peychaud's bitter is right here. I mean, right here. Now that was medicinal as well.
Yes.
And then you get to the point where you're saying about the physicians, right? I love that when people, I think that physicians became the key to everything is because during Prohibition, you were given prescriptions.
Yes.
So say that you had quite a bit of money. Oh, that's great. You can get a prescription for gin and tonic because you needed that every day. You need a little tonic fixer.
Is it what? I wonder if that's why it's called a tonic.
Well, it was. Well, I mean, it was invented.
I mean, because tonic refers to usually some kind of medicinal.
Well, it was invented, honestly, tonic was invented with quinine, and it was to help with the mosquitoes and malaria in India.
Again, back to colonialism. It all comes back to colonialism. My students get tired of hearing about it, but I'm telling you, it's all part of the story.
Smart. You know what? Speaking of that, let's have a drink.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
Let's have a little
A little tonic ourselves.
We're gonna do a little something.
I think this is the designated drinker show.
This is a little different, and it'll be fun. We're gonna put it in here. Sorry. I should have set it up a little bit nicer, but you know, whatevs. Okay, so a little bird told me, named Louise, just kidding,
Chirp, 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 chirp.
told me that you are a whiskey drinker, which is great for me. And then, of course, you'll appreciate that in history, you would have drank a whiskey drink sometime in the early hours of the day.
Right, of course. You got to set yourself up somehow, right?
I mean, it was, it was considered a little pop. So we're gonna put about a half a lemon, about, if you're gonna measure it at home, about 1.25 ounces of lemon juice in this. And I like a little bit heavy on this, just because we're gonna add what I call a little strawberry tonic, which is not quite tonic, because there's no quinine. It's an elixir. So what this is has, it's like strawberry, a little bit of basil, and then just a little bit of spice that's mixed in there, and it's our syrup that we make. So it's kind of healthy, right? Or not.
And as for listeners, you'll give us a recipe on how to make an idea of that?
Yes.
Something like that?
And then we're gonna take strawberry and beet juice. So this is juiced beets and strawberries. So we are adding a little bit of sugar in a different way. So we're gonna add 2 ounces of this. So right now we're at 1.25 ounces of lemon juice, 2 ounces beaten strawberry, 1 ounce of strawberry basil syrup, okay? So we have in there all the things that generally, allegedly, medicine was made from, right?
Yeah, it sounds healthy to me.
Absolutely.
It's kind of healthy, right? And then we're gonna take what everybody wanted the most of, and we're gonna put some liquor in it. So we're gonna use 1.5 ounces of Knob Creek. And if you are familiar with this, it's kind of the base of doing a sours. Except we are changing it up just a little bit because I do not want to put an egg in it this morning. And we'll make it fun. So we're gonna put some ice.
This is always this is the second best part of the show.
Okay.
The best part of the show is when we get to drink it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But watching Gina put a drink together is always amazing.
Fascinating, yeah.
Wow. No.
And you're engaging in your historical roots. A woman producing alcohol for people to get healthier by.
I'll get behind it still with you any day. You wanna? Give me a little shake.
Just a little. She had me do it yesterday. It was pretty.
It was an egg white drink, right? So you need help. So we're gonna pour this over fresh ice. Very pretty. And you're gonna get back about to the quarter top of your glass. And that's what you want because we are gonna actually top this off with a little bit of bubbly.
Because, we have to celebrate your book.
And we're drinking like the elite now, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like they did in the 17th century.
So we're just using this on a little Cava Brut from Spain. You can use anything. You just want to make sure that you have a nice fizz to it.
Look at that.
So would you go drier on that then?
It's kind of a taste preference. I feel like if you're more into, drier, it's fine. If you like it a little bit sweeter, fine. If you, also these drinks are a little forgiving. You can use a really dry rum in here. It'd be really nice. So when we're using any carbonation, just a little bit of a pull through. And we're gonna give it topping. No garnish on this cocktail. None needed. The bubbles are good to go.
Thank you.
And there you go.
Thank you so much.
We're not doing any straws today. We're keeping environmentally conscious.
Cheers.
Cheers, hey.
Cheers.
Straws back then, that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, when did the straw come into play?
Actually, it's an ancient...
Oh, that's beautiful.
Here's the story.
Okay, before the story,
Fantastic.
this is so light and refreshing, and the fact that it's whiskey, but it's...
I don't taste the whiskey.
No.
It's breakfast whiskey.
Your breakfast whiskey?
The best kind of whiskey.
I would have been a great physician. People would have come in every day and been like, what's bothering you?
Gina, you still are a physician. Are you kidding me?
I would have been like, what's bothering you? Like hurts? Right. No problem. Pour this on it and then drink 2 bottles of it and you'll be fine. Okay, sorry. Tell me about the straws.
Yeah, no, I got distracted. This is the historian's mind. It's like, oh no, I can tell you the story about that. So the story is that Babylonians allegedly perhaps invented something of a reed straw to drink beer, because when they would make beer, they would just throw everything in together. They didn't filter it, and all of the mash would kind of ferment and foam at the top, and there'd be a bit of a crust at the top, and they would stick the straws through that after it finished fermenting, stick the straws through so they could drink the beer. And it would usually just be a pot sitting in the middle of a room, and people would gather together, stick their straws in these hollowed out reeds, and drink their beer.
But at least, maybe we should bring those back and use reeds at least.
Cool.
They're biodegradable as part of it's a green straw, literally.
I did not know that, and I love that.
There's these little etchings in these clay tablets of people gathered around a pot, and they have these really long, like straws.
Because so you can lay back.
They had it figured out. I'm telling you, when it comes to creating alcohol and drinking alcohol, humans have never lacked ingenuity.
I mean, I thought my favorite was like the Egyptian stories, like the honeymoon. The honeymoon comes from mead. You take honey and you make it, and they would ferment it and you would drink it, people were like, oh, fertility got you loose. Yeah. So
literally.
So and for 1 month you hung out with your spouse drinking this.
That's why
clearly a baby was coming from that, right? Anyway.
It worked, right?
That was like my favorite story, but I now think that the invention of the reed and punching it through,
the reed straws, yeah.
We should I don't know. We should maybe get somebody to do that just for fun.
Yeah. I think a long time ago, maybe early 2000s.
That's not a long time ago in your world. That was like yesterday.
Well, in terms of the craft brewing, because the Anchor Brewing Company, I think they did that like 10 or 15 years ago, something like that. They collaborated with people and did an old ancient style Babylonian brew, and then they got together, they punched their straws through and drank it.
So I want to wear the cloth and everything. I want to have like a full-on rager. So we're gonna change it up. Like I want to dress in the style. Let's put some thorns in my head. Let's do the whole thing. I think that's
about the drink though. I would not know there's beet juice in there at all.
The strawberry comes.
I think it kind of.
Yeah, and is it the sugar from the beet? Is that what you're talking about? Because
yeah,
it's very good. It's
sugar from the beet. I mean, you can beets have been a very crucial part of alcohol making in general because they were like a form of cheap sugar. Yeah. So they had white beets. They weren't actually red. Red beets didn't come until later when they put more nitrogen in it to get the color. But anyway. When we go to farming now, I feel like I want to hang out and be like, all right, this episode, we're good. Let's go talk about your party. Right. So
with the collapse of the sugar industry.
No, but that's why I thought it'd be fun. Yeah, that's why I thought it'd be fun to use a little bit of beet for you because I feel like that's one thing that definitely keeps coming up over and over again of how they did all that.
Right.
How they were able to produce it because sugarcane wasn't as expensive. It was hard to get.
It was very hard to get. Yeah.
It was hard to physically show up.
Yeah, the distance. Yeah.
They figured out other ways to derive sugar, and that was one of them. Yeah, and stuff like that.
Yeah, they tried growing sugarcane in places of Spain, but it still wasn't the right climate for it. So that's why when Europeans colonized the different islands in the Caribbean, sugarcane was the commodity because they've been trying to get at it for so long. But it's all the way over in India. It's in certain parts of Africa. That's not those aren't accessible regions for them to.
Yeah. Land that was not theirs, too.
Exactly. Well, that's the whole part of that imperialism.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, imperialism.
Funny how that worked.
What was it? Sun never sets on the British Empire. That was it, right? Yeah. Oh, social studies. I did remember something. I'm going to call my social studies professor, teacher, and be like, I was listening. And passing notes. A lot of note passing.
Hey, it's all, I encourage collaboration in my classroom. As long as people are learning the material, that's what I care about. But, and you were absolutely right about the sugar beets being a huge part of early efforts to create sugar cultivation. And then also after emancipation too, and kind of the fall of the sugar industry in the Caribbean, they returned to it later, as well as in other ways of trying to produce sugar. It never was quite as successful, but it was still a really important part.
Red velvet cake came from it, though.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
That's true.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, red velvet cake came from necessity during that time. That was when it was invented, so it came from using beets because of that.
Well, thank you, beets.
Yeah, because you couldn't get pure sugar.
Yeah.
I can get behind that.
I realize we just met. I mean, I might be, I don't know. I sometimes really start loving my guests, but now I'm so I need to learn more. I need to do more. I feel like all this stuff. I love old cookbooks too, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is an incredible thing, and learning how to count drachms and stuff like that. That came from that, all that weight and everything when they made the different alcohols and everything.
I'm so curious to know what those early cordials tasted like, because the amount of herbs and fruits that they put into those things is crazy to me. They're like, throw in rosemary, throw in cloves, throw in some, if you're they would throw in saffron threads. I mean, for the fancy ones, the juice of 30 oranges, gold leaf, ambergris, deer musk.
Oh my goodness.
They went crazy with it. I just kind of want to know what they tasted like.
Be careful what you ask for.
And I know I brought up this book before, but the Book of Early American Beverages, which I absolutely adore, has it was written in the 40s, and then they did one more reprint, and then it died. No one ever has reprinted it since. And there's a lot of recipes in there it's all beverages, obviously. And they date back as far as 1600s for sure, 1660, and that's exactly what it was like. And I made some stuff out of there, but easy stuff like the elderflower wines and the cherry wines and stuff like that. Or I never got into the really crazy stuff. I don't know. I gotta find the right witch that's gonna give me the deer musk that I need. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, right.
I'm looking for that lady, because I feel like they're out there. I just haven't met them yet, and hopefully, this podcast will be they're gonna be oh,
this is how you get the word out. People will find you. Yeah.
I'll squeeze the glands of a deer. It's fine.
So if you need to find Gina and tell her where you can get her deer musk, or you would like the recipe to today's drink, just head over to designateddrinker.show. That's designateddrinker.show. How's that, Gina?
It was good.
You like that?
Yeah.
This was fantastic.
Put your call out there. Maybe we'll get your deer.
I call it to wild. The wildlings.
Collect your coven of witches. Get your little, coven? Yeah.
We're in the right space for that.
That's true.
So, you know what it is?
No.
Yes. But don't worry. There's more later.
Okay. Should we go to a university?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, with that, it's last call.
Oh, no.
Yeah. You don't have to go home.
Okay.
Well, let's go to another barn.
That's fine.
And talk some more.
Done.
Cheers.
Hey, cheers. Thank you all so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.